So, if this dude Joe Biden's presidency couldn't have gotten any worse, this has to be one of the worst presidential runs I've ever seen. I haven't been alive for a lot of them, but any that I have observed being alive or that I've read about or that I've researched has to be one of the worst, because nothing has gotten done. And nothing may be an exaggeration, but then it might not be, right? The Supreme Court just shot down his student loan forgiveness initiative. So then I think back to this whole presidential run, and it started off with trying to get a vaccine mandate passed. That didn't work. He's been duped out of billions of dollars to fund a war that we're not even a part of. The economy sucks, and now the student loan forgiveness has not gone through. Now, what I will say is politics is kind of like this, where you want to get something passed, and then the people who are a part of the other party make it really, really difficult to do so. And while that's a reality here, the point still stands that it really feels as though nothing has gotten done. And even if I don't agree with the policy, I'm just looking at this, just kind of sitting back and observing and realizing that he hasn't really been able to pass anything major. There's nothing when he leaves office that's going to be like, yeah, that's exactly what he did. You can attach that major policy or that major initiative to Joe Biden. And one more thing happened to kind of hit this administration where it hurts. The Supreme Court shut down affirmative action at colleges and universities. And this dude, Joe Biden, is coming off of his couple-day run of pandering to black people because of Juneteenth. So he obviously tweeted about it, gave speeches about it. Article here says, the Supreme Court says colleges and universities can no longer take race into consideration as a specific basis for granting admission, a landmark decision overturning long-standing precedent that has benefited Black and Latino students in higher education. Now, we can get into all the nuances of maybe why affirmative action is good or some of the benefits of it or whatnot, but I honestly think it's more important and imperative that we go the opposite route. Right? I'm not saying that it wasn't necessary at some point in history, but at the rate that this country's going, 200 years into the future, 500 years into the future, if this country hasn't imploded on itself, they'll still be talking about how it's so hard to get ahead as a black person, and we need this and we need that in order to get our foot in the door, as opposed to just trying to get to a point where we're all on an equal playing field as much as humanly possible, because it's very unrealistic in a country that has over 300 million people. But it's doable, especially if we stop making it the staple of our country that we got issues of racism and black people can't do this and people of color can't do that. And some might think that that's a little short-sighted, but anytime that I'm talking about race, I always think back to what Morgan Freeman said, talking about how if you want to be done with racism, then just shut up about it. Obviously, he's speaking on a surface level, but the idea is that so many times when you hear about things of racism, because people won't stop making it such a focal point in any situation. Doesn't mean racism doesn't happen, but there's a difference between racism occurring and then us tolerating a culture of racism. We don't tolerate it. And that might be a less than stellar idea or stance to take, but you can get fired, you can get in serious trouble, you can have your reputation tarnished if you are either deemed a racist, even if you're not actually a racist, or if you've been outed as being an actual racist. It's done. It's over with. Good luck getting a job or a career or being able to show your face again. That's the world we live in now, so we do not tolerate a culture of it. But it still happens, and it's always going to happen. I know that people might not want to hear that, but the reality is that it's always going to happen. So at some point, you got to say, you know what? We got to scrap all of these things, and we just got to look at people as human beings and not, this is a black person. And I only say that because of tweets like this. I saw this tweet, and I promise you I thought it was satire, because I'll see tweets like these, and then I'll go to their page, and it'll be a parody account. They'll have a bunch of rainbow flags and Ukraine flags and like 1,000 pronouns and 1,000 black fists in their bios. Clearly, they're joking. But this was not satire. I saw this after the Supreme Court made their decision, and this is exactly why I can't stand things like affirmative action being so prevalent and making it out to be like black people are just victims on a consistent basis and we can't get ahead based on our own merit. This woman tweeted out, she said, today's Supreme Court decision is a direct attack on black people. No black person will be able to succeed in a merit-based system which is exactly why affirmative action-based programs were needed. Today's decision is a travesty. You know how freaking racist that sounds? Like, people think that they're being so righteous by trying to make the game so easier for black people. But instead, they come off as racist, and it's a chance that they might not even see it. It is not virtuous to assert that black people cannot thrive in a merit-based system because you are asserting that any merit that they may have is so subpar that it's not at the level to compete with anybody else in whatever field they want to go into. That sounds a bit racist to me. And that's the problem with it, is people think that things like affirmative action and giving black people special treatment is a good thing. And at a certain point it was. But we have to be able to get to a certain point where we're like, okay, at this point forward, you just have to be good in order to get to where you want to get to. And it can't just be this initiative of, let me just identify a black person. I talked about this before. That's exactly what this whole Biden administration is. It was just, let me identify black people and people of color and minorities to put in various positions. Just look at our vice president. Kamala Harris made history by being the first black or minority or whatever she is, because she doesn't even know, to be the vice president. But they just shoved her in there to make that history. They didn't want it to happen organically, where you have somebody who's competent and who would be good at the job. No, Kamala Harris sucks. I mean, I have no other way to say it. She's not good at the job. And it's in part because she's never around. I never see Kamala Harris, and then I'll just see her randomly one day, 5 months into the future, her cackling at some climate change conference or whatever. And then I won't see her for months. I don't think she does like anything really other than that. So this country just like putting black people in a position, regardless of their merit, that's a problem. And then if you have somebody else who just so happens to be white, who's better, and then they miss out on an opportunity because they're not black, how is that not some form of racism? I know people aren't going to call it that because they've been diluted to believe that black people can't be racist or that people can't be racist against white people, but how is it not? And I was talking to somebody else, and I'm glad he said it because it made a lot of sense. And even if he agrees with something like affirmative action, at least he's being honest and saying that he believed that it was like something like affirmative action is a necessary form of racism, where you prop black people up or you put black people in these positions purposefully in order to diversify the field. But at least if you're admitting that this is a form of racism or something alike, where you are putting these people in these positions because of their skin color and leaving these other people out because of their skin color, what else would you call that? Affirmative action is just a nice way to say it. But at some point, we as black people have to demand that we don't want this. But we also have to be able to acknowledge that the country has moved forward. It's not perfect, but in order for people to denounce something like affirmative action, to say, hey, I don't need it, I will get in based on my own merit and my merit alone, we have to acknowledge that this country is not like how it was back in 1923. But if you associate this country with how it was 100 years ago, well, of course you're going to be like, oh, white people are so racist and the system is rigged against me, and I'm not going to get in unless they soften the rules for me specifically. And if you operate that way, you leave the door open for people like this. These white people who feel bad for being white will tweet something like this, talking about how black people can't make it in a merit-based system. She thinks she's being noble here, but the reality is that she feels bad for being the color that she is. And she thinks that somebody like me, someone else who looks like me, is incapable of attaining anything unless the rules are easier for us. And all that is just her being fed a bunch of BS her whole life. Racism still exists, yeah, but not every entity you go into, not every school, not every job you go to, they all have it out for you just because you're black. You can get into places based on your own merit and you just so happen to be black. That's a possibility. I know sports isn't the best example because they're kind of unrealistic in terms of being able to relate to the average person, but you look at leagues like the NBA and no one ever makes a fuss about how the vast majority of the league is black. No one ever does. Now, how they got there is irrelevant. I understand a lot of these guys come from the hood or rough beginnings and they play basketball because it keeps them out of trouble and it's their only ticket out. I understand that, and maybe some other white people might not have to go the sports route to be able to be successful. I get it, but that's not all of them. There are some black kids who just enjoyed playing basketball and then they grew up in a good environment and they played and then they went to the NBA. But the point is that no one ever complains about basketball players or football players being predominantly black. And the point that I'm trying to get at is any space in which the majority of people are black and only a few people are white, no one ever says a word. It's only ever when it's the opposite. If you go to a school and the majority of kids are white and the minority are black, now it's a problem. My high school, predominantly black, only had a few white kids. No one ever said anything. You look at sports, predominantly black, no one ever says anything. I saw a clip from the BET Awards. I don't even need to tell you what the clip was. All you need to know is that the BET Awards is all black people. They got a whole network and they give awards only for black people. You have a whole award show in which you only give awards to black people, and it's all black people there. And no one ever says anything about it. And like I said, people can try to argue the nuance about it. Oh, it's supposed to be here because of this, that, and the third. That is irrelevant. Because like I said, at some point, we got to cut it out with black people need this and black people need that. We got to get to a point where it's just like, okay, just go and just see who's the best. See who earns that award. Not because of their skin color, but let's just see who earns the award. See who gets into the school. See who makes the team. Just see who's better. But we keep going down this path, and like I said, this will go on forever. So that's my problem with it. There's no end in sight of trying to coddle us and being like, oh my goodness, you need all these handouts or you need the game to be easier. And then you leave the door open for people like this who believe that because of the color of our skin that we cannot make it in a merit-based system. That seems racist to me. So I'm down with this, right? Because we got to get to the point where we can acknowledge that the country has changed, and even though it's not perfect, it's moved forward. And if you go to a place that doesn't want you, unless they explicitly make it known that we don't want you because you're black, and that we have a proven record of not accepting black people because we don't like black people, then just take your talent somewhere else. Unless that's the case, right? If that's the case, then yeah, sue them, take them to court, do what you got to do. But if that's not the case, then just take your talent somewhere else. There's a lot to do in this country, in the world, but in this country, there's a lot to do. So you'll find your place. But just because somebody doesn't accept you, just because somebody doesn't let you in, that doesn't mean that it's racist. Maybe we should do some self-reflection. You will truly be liberated once you take accountability and responsibility for everything. So if you don't get into a school, like I said, unless they explicitly make it known through their track record or through the words that they say or whatnot, that we don't want you because you're black, do some self-reflection. Take responsibility for it, and then go somewhere else where you will have a better chance to succeed, and then go kill it. Because me personally, I think that black people can thrive in a merit-based system. And the difference between somebody like me and somebody like this girl is that I'm not constantly thinking about their race. I think that this is a person who just so happens to be black who can thrive in a merit-based system. So if you are one of these people, you don't need this. You don't need this affirmative action. You don't need the easy road. You don't need these quote-unquote handouts. You can do it, right? If you're good enough, if you work hard, you can do it. So go do it.